I'd like to begin with heartfelt thanks to Bishop Alistair, to Bishop Sanchez, and to Reza Jafar, who is there now, okay, for really inviting me from the very first meeting to come and to learn and to continually think about what I might have to contribute in what is not a future-looking crisis. It's been a crisis for a very long time, which must be frustrating for some of you, certainly for me, that more progress isn't being made. I also wanted to clarify, so as not to disappoint, that I won't be speaking specifically about what vulnerability is, but my remarks around belonging are especially meant for those who are vulnerable, who often end up to be those who are the strongest and the leaders, and I'm going to be mentioning one of those now and introducing her later on today. And thank you very much to the wider GSN for allowing me to share some thoughts with you. I've been able to attend several of the iterations of this gathering in the past, beginning at the Vatican, which was quite a joy, and I found all of them incredibly valuable. And this afternoon, you will hear from someone that I met 6 months ago, who has made a profound impact on me. Sophie Otiende, who is just over here, is a powerful advocate and survivor leader. And I feel that if I do well today, I'll be very happy, and if I don't do well, I'll try better next time. But I know I've already succeeded because Sophie's here. And I'm excited for the group, for you, Sophie, to share the perspective of other survivors. And this is something that, especially since getting to know you over these months, that I see as our North Star in approaching this issue. It is the voices of the survivors that are the most important voices in this vital work, and I feel that we must ensure that we're holding space not only for their stories, but for the solutions they provide as well. For now, with the time I've been provided, I'd like to talk about a model for change that I've been developing for a long time, a model that I argue can be applied to the crucial task of decreasing personal and systemic vulnerability and ultimately to counter the growing crisis of modern slavery and human trafficking. Because as we know, this massive global problem is only getting worse over time, and it will require bold, systemic change and outside-the-box thinking to truly remedy. And I would also say that we must not forget love. This will require a great deal of love. For over 2 decades, I've focused my work on understanding what factors contribute to social isolation and generating solutions to build its opposite, belonging. Through this, I've developed a belonging framework that I hope will help policy makers, organizers, and individuals to create communities that are more just and more equitable. The belonging framework is a rights-based, agency-centered theory of change. The theory posits that in order to tackle the complex intersectional challenges of today, including poverty, and in order to combat the social isolation experienced by those vulnerable situations, including people trapped in modern slavery and trafficking, we must focus our efforts on building belonging. So what is belonging? Well, to me, this means being at home, wherever you are. But belonging is actually quite subjective, holistic, deeply felt, and personal. And that said, I found that our personal sense of belonging can often be boiled down to our connection to 4 core dimensions: people, place, power, and purpose, or for ease of reference, the 4 Ps. First, people. When we belong, we have connection to our community and those around us, and we form relationships rooted in reciprocity. Next is place. This means feeling at home in the spaces we inhabit. This can refer to our fixed neighborhoods, our natural environment, and our temporary spaces, like a workplace setting. Third is power. We can think of this of having agency and influence over the systems that govern us. And by contrast, what it means when you have a lack of agency, of choice, and of voice. And finally, purpose. When we belong, we believe in something bigger than ourselves. It's helpful to think of this as our own personal sense of why. I should point out that normally I would give faith for those who follow a faith and spaces where we can celebrate together in the category of place. But today, I'd like you also to think of this in terms of purpose and our connection to those things that we cannot see, but that we know are guiding us. People, place, power, and purpose. These are the dimensions that, if pursued, will ensure that our policy-making efforts are rights-based and tracking to deliver us a true experience of belonging. But I would argue that we shouldn't stop there. We must think beyond connection to the 4 Ps. Belonging is not some distant utopia to strive toward, but rather a real and essential birthright that must be protected and upheld for every person, regardless of our circumstances. And this is why I believe that each and every one of us possesses an inherent right to belong by simple virtue of the fact that we have been born and the sacred truth that we are all children of God. The belonging framework is a theory of change that we can use to defend and uphold the rights of all people. And the nexus between this work and the scourge of modern slavery and human trafficking is indeed a stark one. The Sustainable Development Goals speak in Target 8.7 about the dire need to end modern slavery, trafficking, and child labor, and in this decade. But the trend lines show us a global community heading in the exact opposite direction. And to assume that slavery and trafficking happen only on distant shores, as all of you know, is a fallacy. Take the UK, for example, where experts estimate that more than 100,000 people live in modern slavery. And actually, the number is probably well in excess of that. Again, I'm not advocating that data is the solution, but boy, does it get in the way of our caring and knowing what's right if we can't incentivize people to make better measures that we can then bring through the process. If only it was enough to care and do the right thing, that would be quite wonderful. Last year saw a record number of calls to the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, with UK-based victims originating from 106 countries. And as a quick aside, you'll notice my use of the word victim here as it relates to those currently trapped in modern slavery and human trafficking situations, not to be confused with people including Sophie, who have broken free and are no longer victims, but are now survivors and leaders in their own right. The Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, run by the charity Unseen, reports that this is the first year in a row that calls to their platform has increased. Labor abuse is the most common form of exploitation reported, with a huge increase in the number of victims from the so-called care sector. The care sector, as we know from the COVID experience, needs a massive overhaul. This would require serious government investment, support for aging in place, agency-driven policy making, and among other things, stronger regulations to protect those being cared for and for the caregivers themselves. This applies here too. And I also want to mention a bit more about the caregivers. The caregivers can very often be the survivors themselves who really get it. And so we always, I think, need to imagine, and this is what I feel that anything that I work on is driven by, that we are here, or at least I am here, to hold up this circle and not to ever be in the middle of it, but to hold up the circle for those who have solutions, who have experience, and people who can bring all their different resources to bear so that forces of dark and evil cannot penetrate so easily, and also then to really encourage the leadership from where it is. And I'm sure that Sophie's going to speak more eloquently and in a first-person voice about this, but I just wanted to add a bit from my end as well. The problem of modern slavery and human trafficking transcends borders, as we know, and I wanted to touch on that as well. Data from Moody's tells us that incidents of modern slavery across Europe have increased by nearly 17% by 2022 to 2023. In the EU, countries with the highest number of modern slavery events reported or known include Italy, France, Spain, and I'm going to add to that the UK, even though the UK is no longer in the EU. On a global scale, there are an estimated, and again, I would imagine this to be very low, 50 million people living in modern slavery, with an estimated 1 in 4 being children. I've been involved, a little bit involved in an initiative led by Human Rights Watch to end shackling, to end human shackling, which to me is also astounding that it exists today. Not only exists today, it exists in wide numbers and in broad daylight and everywhere in the world, including my country of Canada. I believe that this conversation also demands that we fight back against forced marriage and sexual exploitation, the latter of which is identified as the most lucrative form of forced labor, according to the ILO. From young girls being separated from their families and exploited as house help in Nigeria, to forced labor in the UK care sector, to agricultural bonded labor in Nepal, to child marriage in Bangladesh, Uganda, and even many U.S. states. And one of my two of my former students at McGill University in Canada, and one came from a country in Western Africa and the other from Canada. So we see that the problem of modern slavery is multifaceted, on the rise, and global. And one of the things that I keep searching for, and I carry hope every day and joy every day, is where's the hope and where is the ability for everyone to experience the joy of being. Thanks to the work of organizations like GSN and others, we comprehend the scope and scale of this massive problem. And on that, I have to say that I truly admire this organization for recognizing and welcoming a diverse array of faiths, including those with no faith at all, to help be part of the solution. And I commend GSN for taking a multi-faith approach to this work and realizing that a truly collective whole of society effort is required to combat this enormous challenge. And I mention that particularly at this point where we see so many reported, covered differences, battles, polarization among people of different faiths. And it makes me really wonder, is that what it is? I don't think that's what it is. I think that's where politics comes in and where extremism comes in. So the fact that GSN has been going now for many years, I've finished raising a child and become a grandmother twice in those years, so I know how long it is, and yet we still come back to this central issue of what is it to belong and honor one another's belonging and one another's differences. Indeed, when we apply the experience of modern slavery and human trafficking against the four core dimensions of belonging, we see a dearth of belonging in every respect. Let's return to the belonging framework before I conclude, and specifically the four P's: people, place, power, purpose. Those trapped in modern slavery and trafficking are denied connection to people, often ripped from their families and cut off from any semblance of a support network. We see lack of connection to place, with victims being taken from their homes and their communities against their will to places often unknown and terrifying until they arrive at their final destination. Disconnection from place is a tragically common element experienced by those ensnarled by human trafficking. The essential belonging dimension of power is completely violated in modern slavery cases, with people having no say in what they do, where they go, who they interact with, and when they might leave. Think of the widespread experience of the newly trafficked having their passports taken away when arriving in a new place and being forced to work off their travel debt in order to get identification back. And finally, victims of modern slavery and human trafficking lack connection to purpose. You know, I am really, truly all for well-being, and certainly the belonging vocabulary weaves into that, and social connectedness very, very nicely, which I appreciate in getting out my message. But when we look at victims and survivors here, ultimately, we see that it's very hard when you feel like you are sitting alone at the bottom of a well, which is how I've always described what this is, to imagine what you should be doing with your career, where your child might receive an education, where you might go to worship, who you might be able to reach out to or might reach out to you as a friend. All of that goes. And so I think that in the vocabulary, there needs to be something, and maybe it can come from someone in this group, to describe what it is where you don't even have a means of thinking about your well-being or those around you, because all you are trying to do is to survive. Now, perhaps some people who are trafficked or forced into modern slavery might develop a sense of purpose that is completely dependent on their horrific situation, the purpose of escaping or finding a way home, for example. But that's not connection to true purpose. That's not authentic to an individual's greatest aspirations and dreams in life outside of a slavery or trafficking context. And in terms of a belonging context, even if someone has known love from their family whom they've been ripped away from, or follows a faith and knows in that way they're not alone, or may in other ways know that they are not alone, if what you are experiencing is really the bottom of the well, then that's how you're going to process everything. And we have to be aware of how the light can come back in. And when we're caring, we need to not just be there for a while, but forever, if that's what's required. And so in addition to experiences of physical, verbal, psychological, and sexual abuse, victims of modern slavery and human trafficking are with absolute certainty suffering a harrowing deficit of belonging. And I believe that a shift to belonging and ultimately recognizing the right to belong would go a long way to help those in vulnerable and often dangerous circumstances, and at the same time making sure that they are honored for their grace, for their tenacity, for their will to live, and for being sentient beings. And I think that that's really important, because if someone's left a victim, then they never get their power back. I'm going to bring this to conclusion and simply say that when we look at belonging at its core, it is about quality of life, but it's also about agency and empowerment, and what is the beauty in life, and what is the joy in life. And we all need to work together on this. We know this. And yet I think that there also has to be some way, and I'm not necessarily speaking of people in this room, but of igniting what is in our heart, igniting our spirit, connecting with our soul, and looking, for example, at business supply chains, because you spoke about this, top of mind at the moment, to be able to, without judgment, to be able to really get deeply in there as why is it that people keep doing this to other people. And I think that ultimately is the hardest point and the only way to make the change. And thank you very much.